welcome everybody to our webinar about the integration process during a company sale. What is integration? My name is Gabriela Smith, and I'm the founder of GNS Law. We're a mergers and acquisitions law firm. And presenting today, and the conversation will be with Elena. Elena, you want to introduce yourself?
I'm Elena Stegman. So thank you very much, Gabby, for the opportunity to talk about integration, one of my favorite topics. I have decades of experience in various aspects of operations. Most recently, I was with a private equity firm that grew dramatically by purchasing and integrating SaaS companies. So majority of my PE experience that I'm talking about today or integration experience is going to be delivered through that lens.
Awesome. So I think it would be great to start the conversation with what the heck is integration? Um, we hear the word integration usually after we sign an LOI with the buyer. I'm talking from the seller's perspective here. And then once we get started on due diligence, I hear the founders come to me say, no, they want to set up a call about integration. So when you are in the middle of a sale process of a company and the buyer starts talking about integration, Elena, what are they talking about?
Yeah, good question. So when buyers talk about integration, they're talking about the full process of bringing the two companies together. So when you're talking about like a strategic buyer, they have an investment thesis, they're interested in certain things. When you're talking about a private equity buyer, they have typically a different investment thesis. And so the integration is everything that has to happen in order for the investment thesis to come true. And, we can talk about product synergies or accelerated growth or stuff like that, but it all comes down to dollars, right? The investment thesis is something that is often described with charts and PowerPoints, but it all comes down to what's the financial gain involved in acquiring this company. So there are dollar amounts and there's a timeline associated with making the investment thesis come true. So it's very complex, comprehensive. Many people think it's just like IT systems or merging the org charts. It is those things too, but it's a very structured process. If the acquirer is doing a good job, they have started talking about integration before the close and before the deal is, really signed and the dollars are transferred to the seller. But they should definitely be talking about like day one planning, what needs to happen on day one, literally. So like payroll, customer communications, and then the post-close execution. All right.
Okay.
So what is everything that has to happen in the coming months? Typically, it's like 30, 60, 100 days
Okay.
timeframes.
So getting maybe into a granular level, let's say I'm an IT company and I have an HR department, I have my marketing department, I have my social media accounts, I have my bank accounts, savings accounts, I have pipelines of clients, the whole operation. Can you get maybe like granular level? Like, are we talking about like how do we merge our HR departments? How do our marketing programs blend or maybe don't blend? Can you maybe, I don't know, pick a department and maybe do a hypothetical rundown on an actual integration and how it would happen and like who would be involved?
Absolutely. So, great question. I'll pick kind of a couple of examples to make it a little broader. So, from an HR perspective, the HR team and the acquisition team. So, typically, if you're working in a PE portfolio type of environment, there's a team who handles the acquisition process. So it starts with the M&A team. They identify a target, then they go through LOI, and it's beginning to look really good. Once it's at that stage, a whole team of people on the buyer side is brought in. and they are functional experts. So somebody from technology is brought in to do due diligence on the technology side. Somebody from HR will be involved in looking at the org chart of the organization that you're about to buy and, comparing it to like your internal benchmarks. If it's a company of a certain size and you've already onboarded other companies of that size, is your potential acquisition target looking like they're overstaffed in some area? Do they have a surprising number of implementation specialists given their ARR and their number of customers, for example? So decisions are often made in advance about who is going to be brought over with the acquisition and which people need to be, to put it nicely, offboarded. And, if it's a well-handled process and there's a good collaboration between the seller and the buyer, they will have a very, professional, people-friendly process for deciding how to handle the people that are not going to be coming on board after day one. So that's an HR, very high level example. From a sales and marketing perspective, if your investment thesis is that you will accelerate the growth of the company that you're buying because you have way bigger chops when it comes to sales and marketing, and the firm you're buying is like very technologically savvy, but their growth has stalled because they're not strong in sales and marketing, you are bringing that expertise that's part of the investment thesis. In that case, you really want to get very granular about the customers that are there right now, customer contracts. You want to look at their pipeline of leads. Like if you're saying if your investment thesis is this company is going to bring in $1 million in new logo sales in the next 12 months, you look at their pipeline and let's say they only have 500,000 in the pipeline, obviously the math doesn't add up. So things are looked at a very granular level. You mentioned to me that you have a client who is selling their company and the buyer is asking for access to their systems.
Right.
Well, in the example that I gave right now, where the investment thesis about go to market, I can see how the acquiring company would want to have logins to their CRM,
Right.
right? They want to see what kind of
Would you give them the logins?
so I would say if money has not exchanged hands, so if you haven't closed, it's not an executed deal, money hasn't come in, I would say, like very simplistically, no. Of course,
Right.
there are probably some scenarios where it may be in the seller's interest to do that, but I would want to take a very close look at why it would be in the seller's interest to do that before granting the acquiring company access. So, like, my general answer is absolutely not. The deal has to be closed. And then, that company owns you and they have rights to everything. And of course, you're
Right.
going to give them access to everything.
Right. Because I mean, the way I look at it is, when you have an LOI and you're in due diligence, it's like you can let them in the house, look around and ask questions, maybe look under the carpet a little bit, and that's fine. But I think the integration is more like, oh, here are the keys to my house. Now do whatever you need to do, refurbish whatever you need to do in my house. And so that, it's how do you handle, I mean, you said very straight, just say no. But for founders, I mean, who are selling their company for, several millions of dollars, usually when you're talking about integration, it's a pretty involved process. We're talking about,
Yeah.
private equities acquiring or, some strategic,
Yeah.
a large deal, middle market deal for sure, lower middle market maybe. Integration will be involved. And it's so emotional. There's so much deal fatigue and there's just so much of that. Do we ever say yes just to please the buyer? Ever?
I would not say yes just to please the buyer. Now, having been on the buyer side, so one thing that I didn't mention about myself when I did a self intro is I've had experience on all sides of that process. So how did I learn about being a private equity buyer? Is I was actually an operator, a chief operating officer of a SaaS company that was sold to private equity. And then after working as an operator within the portfolio, the private equity firm gave me a promotion. They offered me a GM role within the portfolio. And then I started working with the founders of the companies that were acquiring as a GM. So, I've been through the entire conveyor belt, if I can say it this way. And so, um, I understand the pressure, especially when you're a small founder, you're being offered millions of dollars by a private equity or a strategic buyer. The pressure is great. But I really don't see the need for it. And in fact, I would say if you're feeling pressured, that's a red flag. I would, maybe by then it's too late. I don't know, you're the
Yeah.
attorney.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But I would say there should not be pressure. Now, having said that, I also, of course, understand that the buyer really needs to have a lot of information in
Right.
order to make an informed decision, not only about whether you're the right acquisition target for them, but whether they can give you the valuation that you want, right? It's kind of like competing priorities here. You want to be as protective as possible about your proprietary stuff, but at the same time, you want to disclose the information that should be disclosed in order for the buyer to like truly understand the value, right,
Right.
of your firm. And so typically the way that's handled is by having a data room, right? Where the buyer gives you a list of things that they're interested in. So, like your pipeline flow, your org chart, your revenues over the last however many years, all of that information can live in a data room, a place where you have control over what kind of information you're sharing and when and to what extent. And so I haven't seen, in my experience, I haven't seen the need for the buyer having to log into live systems
Right.
prior to close to make really good, solid decisions.
Yeah. And yeah, maybe, I don't know, maybe the one thing I can think of is if they need to like do any kind of penetration test on some software. I've seen them do that, but that's part of the IT due diligence, not necessarily the integration, which is, access to the server or give me the key to whatever, password thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. So, and pen testing can be usually is done by a third party.
Right.
And so, if you're talking about selling a SaaS company, you've had pen testing performed. And you can provide the results of that. That's not
Right.
unusual. Even if you're not selling your company, if you're bidding on a project as a vendor, your potential customer will probably want to see a pen test report anyway.
Right.
So you're already sharing that kind of information. So a buyer going in to do the pen testing, again, I think there should be
Yeah.
some like very, very specific conditions that make that acceptable.
Right. And what about when the buyer says, I want to meet your customers? When is the right time for the buyer to have a sit down with the key customers? And what are some of the tips or maybe responses we can give? I mean, I've seen it, and that feels so
Yeah.
intrusive, especially if they are in the middle of due diligence. And some buyers will want to meet customers in the middle of the due
Yes.
diligence. What is the proper way? How do we handle this?
Yeah, and I actually was on the receiving end of that request when I was working at the company that was going through acquisition. And I'll tell you, as the person who is running that company, I felt extremely uncomfortable with that. And I tried to push back as much as possible. And I had a kind of a back and forth with the founder, who was highly motivated, of course, to sell the company and wanted to give the buyer as
To
much as
be
possible.
helpful? Yeah.
And so we agreed on a kind of a very short, very abbreviated list with who the buyer can meet with. And I don't remember now, I don't want to make stuff up, but we may have even done an NDA to cover the conversations. And I'll tell you, my biggest concern in that whole part of the transaction was not even the customers finding out. I mean, like, that's a big thing too. But what I worried about is our customer support team interacts with our customers on a
Mm,
daily basis
right.
sometimes, and they, like, over the years they become friends. And so if the customer received what they thought was like a weird phone call, they were very likely to contact one of my employees and say, I got this phone call from these people and they're claiming to do this and that. And I was just afraid that that would blow the cover
Right.
on what we were trying to keep as an undercover thing. We didn't want the whole company to know that we were talking, that we were on the market and talking to potential buyer. So it was tricky. We did agree on a very short list. So I think we gave them maybe three or five instead of the, I don't know, 20, 30, 50, however many they were asking, and had conversations with the customer first to let them know and ask them for, you know, like,
Right.
be professional about this. It's
Right.
TBD, it's not a done deal.
Right. And you
Yeah.
actually touched on a subtopic I want to make sure we hit, which is the secrecy of it. Because you don't put your company for sale and then your employees and everybody finds out. In fact, only your top people, and we get into the topic of you should have your right hand and your left hand people, whoever they are, you should have that ecosystem formed. But managing an integration process when the deal can fall through at any time, and we're talking integration really starts with the planning before closing. So it kind of adds to this level of deal fatigue and emotions, and I don't know what's next, and are they doing it right? And you're with the attorney, with the CPA, with the CFO, with an expert like you. It is. It is very involved. It's an involved process, but let's just for a second touch about the secrecy and managing integration. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, so I would say most of the founders that I've worked with, including the one where, I was a COO going through the acquisition, keep the information about, like, potentially selling to themselves for as long as possible, which of course puts a lot of stress and pressure on themselves. They're trying to, like, often these are small companies, they describe their culture as, we're not just friends, we're family. So they're used to being, like, very unguarded and sharing personal things. So it's often a great emotional burden on the founder to keep that to themselves for as long as possible. But then, like you said, most of them pull in, they have a senior leadership team or executive team, or, like a chief operating officer, somebody who's a trusted partner. And often that information gets disclosed around the LOI.
Awesome.
We just signed or we're about to sign an LOI. Here's why. That conversation is often very emotional because, sometimes people on the leadership team kind of, they maybe have a sense that something's going on, but some, like, never, are not expecting it. So it's a shocker. So that first conversation can be very emotional. The one that I was part of, when the founder made the announcement, he made it to the kind of inner circle and he got very teary-eyed in that conversation. And towards the end, he said, like, he had felt that he was carrying a great burden by himself
Mm,
for, it was like, I think, 9 months. And
yeah.
he was grateful that he could unburden. And so, anyway, beyond that, our leadership team, and this is how I've seen it played out through the companies that I've worked with as a GM, form a communication plan
Right.
that informs, first of all, the employees of the company that a sale is pending. And that often happens as late into the process as possible. It's typically not the day after the leadership team found out. And that is not because you want to be secretive around the rest of the team,
Right.
really to make sure that there are as few chances of any leaks as possible, information leaks.
Right.
Because what could happen is somebody on the team could come home, share the news with their spouse. Their spouse maybe works at, some industry
Right.
organization or trade show, or maybe even a competitor. That news gets spread, and lo and behold, a lot of people know before the deal is closed.
Yeah.
Therefore, that secrecy, it's really, really important to protect it as close as possible to the announcement to the rest of the world. So day
Yeah.
one. Yeah.
Yeah, and again, you bring a couple more points that I want to kind of dig a little deeper on, but the one, I mean, for anybody who hasn't gone through an M&A deal or selling their company, and they're hearing all these things, right? It's like imagine your teary-eyed colleague, and then what's ahead is a bunch of negotiation with attorneys and with, a bunch of financial analysis. I mean, it is an involved process, super, super involved. So yeah, definitely. I want to talk next about how do I get ready for integration. But before we do that, I want to take one step deeper into going back to the contact with the customer. So I've seen it done many times, and I just wanted to maybe we can put more color on the ways that you've seen it or how you recommend doing it. But one of the ways that I've seen it is, and this was private equity tends to do these, at least in my experience. They'll say something like, look, we want to talk to your customers. And obviously, they want to do it before they close. It's part of the closing requirement, right? And so,
Yep.
what they do is they got a third party to
Hmm.
pretend to be a customer
Yes.
service,
Yes.
check in and taking their temperature. And there's
Yep.
a whole process. Is that how you've seen it? Is that basically what you were talking about? It was a third party. It wasn't the
Yes.
buyer calling the customer saying, "Hey, I'm about to acquire you." It was, is that okay? Can you talk a little bit to that?
Yeah, yep. So there are third parties that, of course, So in the case of the company that I worked at, the customers were large hospitals.
Mm,
And they were used to having, they had a ton of
right.
vendors, and the vendors, like these are very high profile customers, like the Mayo Clinic and Johns Hopkins and Cleveland Clinic. They're big names. So their customers definitely invest money in making sure that, their customers are happy. And they understand that just coming out and asking them directly often does not give them like real life answers if they are frustrated. So it's not uncommon for vendors to these organizations to have to like hire a third party, a marketing or survey company and ask questions. So that is typically how it's handled. Sometimes, depending on the kinds of questions that are asked, it can be more direct and more informational, but typically it's protected by like the mechanism that you're talking about. Yeah.
Right. And besides that one, is
I
there
highly recommend that that's how it's done.
super? And so any other mechanism is kind of red flaggy. Don't do it. Would you agree?
Exactly. I would avoid that as much as possible. Yeah.
Super. I mean,
And I want to go back to I think we have a little bit of lag here, so I'll let you lead with your next question.
okay. I think I'm back. Super. No, I was gonna say, I mean, it just goes to the fact, right? Like if you've never sold your company before, you probably don't even know unless you hear this webinar that, oh, somebody potentially might want to talk to your customers. But if I put myself in the shoes of the founder of the seller, it's like I worked so much to get this customer. And then to build this company, and then this third party comes and wants to ask my clients how I serve them. So you get to that kind of ground level. It is intrusive, but it is what it is. There's no way around it. Would you agree?
Yeah, it's a very intrusive process, and I'll tell you that one of the founders that I worked with said that it felt like a colonoscopy to him.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I mean, that's probably similar to what I've heard, for on our side as legal counsel, which it is the entire M&A process. It's, unless you're an attorney and you just love, this negotiation deal contracts and the chaos of it. I mean, it is painful. But let's talk about readiness because I think, you and I have spoken offline about how important it
Yeah.
is to be ready because
Yeah.
being ready can definitely remove so many of the pain points in every aspect from the financial,
Yeah.
from the legal, and now your expertise more on the operations. So, how does a company get ready for the integration process during that company sale process?
So you obviously you do the company X-ray to get them ready from a legal perspective. We can do a similar process with operational diligence to help founders identify like where are the areas that they're likely to cause integration challenges, on day one or even during LOI. So one of the big things that a buyer looks for is repeatability, right? They don't want to buy a system or a company where everything is done for the like one-off, or information lives in the heads of like a few people, right? So they want repeatability. So processes that work ideally without the founder's constant involvement. They want visibility. They want clean, reliable data. It's like financial data, operational, customer metrics. And so I'll just say as an aside, if you're already used to doing customer satisfaction surveys, you have NPS scores, you do CSAT, having that information and being able to present that to a potential buyer is actually going to make them a lot less reliant on conversations with customers. I mean, they're still going to want to do it, but it will give them a lot more confidence if you are already serving your customers, you have the data, you do, I don't know, quarterly surveys. You have a team that meets to discuss the results of the surveys to identify issues. So the more metrics you have in place, the more processes that are documented, that all points to operational stability. So, this is what a buyer is interested in. They want to see a scalable business. And so what can you do to get ready? You can, again, like I said, you can do an operational gap analysis and, we can talk offline about what that would look like. I'm able to do that with companies and give them a scorecard that kind of shows them which areas they have the biggest gaps that would make an integration process really like unnecessarily painful. And so again, I'm talking about like documenting core processes. You don't have to document every single thing, but like identify 10 or 15 processes that really run your company. Upgrade reporting reliability, make sure that you have clean data. Again, that like signals, it gives a lot of confidence to a prospective buyer. Like they know what they're buying, they can see that you've been measuring and tracking things, you have clean data. And I would say to like prepare your team emotionally and culturally when the time is right. Because I will tell you that 80% of either failed integrations or integrations that kind of got seriously derailed are not caused by technical issues. They're typically caused by people issues. It's a founder who underestimated just how much was going to be involved after integration, right? They're already tired and exhausted and frustrated when integration begins. And, they're also running a company on top of going through the integration process. They often have a team that doesn't understand why did the acquiring firm, why are they asking us for all these reports, all this information? They often get ornery and
Right.
combative about that. They're like, why are you asking? And also, if you keep asking me to generate these reports for you, when am I supposed to do my day job? My day job is to answer the phone when customers call. Now you're asking me to sit in on meetings with you where I'm generating new reports. I'm walking you through what the data means. I'm walking you through how we do pricing for our customers. So there's a lot of like naivete about the culture of, now being part of probably a private equity play because those tend to dominate the small to mid-market SaaS sales, right? Um, and the buyer or the founder is often unprepared for this. And so
Right.
unfortunately, what I've seen happen is the founder sometimes leaves prematurely and
Mm.
doesn't stick it out through integration. That is very painful, both for the team, the culture. The founder made promises that, we get to stay, we get to keep our culture. This is good for us. It's added job security. They say all these things that they mean in the moment, but when they jump ship because they can't take it anymore, because they were completely unprepared for this, it puts the rest of the team at risk. And sometimes people follow, they're worried about their own job security and then they leave too.
Right.
And so there's a lot of unhappy stories that happen because the buyer didn't prepare the team for the cultural change and, really what it means to operate within that kind of an environment.
Right. And I think when you were saying earlier, we were talking about what can we do to prepare. And you did mention we do have the Company X Red GNS Law, which is a pre-sale due diligence process where we walk you through. It's like a gap analysis from the legal
Yeah.
perspective. But I think the important thing here is that a sale of a company can be an extremely painful event, or it can be a much, much less painful event if the company is ready. And getting ready, I just firmly believe you don't just go out unless you're being really, really good and careful and specific about making sure your processes in every aspect are ready. I think you need to take at least a year or two. We actually say for the legal due diligence, you need to start getting ready 5 years before, at the latest, maybe 3 years before, for your legal to be clean for the buyer's eyes. But I think that the takeaway is that you can get ready and you should try to get ready to remove the pain because it will be possibly a long process and deal fatigue is real. And then the way we see the deal fatigue is like, just let them have it. Don't negotiate. Flora, I just sign the non-compete. I just want this thing over. I'll sign the non-compete. And you say it in a moment of emotion. And then maybe you do sign something that you didn't want to just because you want to get the deal done. But for me, just like you highlighted, getting ready ahead of time will remove so much of the pain and put you more in control of the actual process than just going out and just doing it, and whatever happens, happens. So I think that that's a great point. And a gap analysis like the one you are talking about, is it like a questionnaire? What does it look like?
So it's a combination of things. It is a questionnaire. It also involves some, face-to-face interactions. And by that, I don't mean like on site, through meetings where I'm asking either the founder or if there's a, leadership team to walk me through how they run their business. So we're looking at like people and leadership readiness. Is their team like structure? And role clarity? Is there an org chart? Are there job descriptions? In many small companies, people wear many hats, right? That's like, that's typical and that's completely appropriate. But in an ideal world, I would love to see, if you're both a customer success specialist and also marketing coordinator, which is like common, I would want to see a job description that reflects both of these things so that when you're acquired, your acquiring company knows, oh, okay, somebody's handling, marketing, at least from a coordinator standpoint. So that means as an acquirer, we don't have to invest in that, for example. So like documenting people, stuff, process maturity, are these scalable processes or do they like, there's one person who knows how to do it And if they
Right.
happen to get spooked during the integration process or even prior to that, you now lost the key resource. And we as an acquirer bought a company
Yeah.
where, these things are not documented or not scalable. We look at systems, data infrastructure, quality of earnings are 80% of your sales, driven by 20% of your customers. That's a really high risk situation for an acquirer, right? So, maybe your valuation is going to be impacted by that. We look at governance, controls, how decisions are made. This is kind of a lighter touch from an operational perspective because, you're from a legal perspective, you've got the chops there. So we just touch on that lightly. So yeah, we interview people. We ask for evidence of certain things, like how you measure, what kind of metrics you have, how do you budget, and then, assess the organization, like low, medium to high readiness scale. And I'm going to say that, I think a lot of people understand the earnout concept, right? When they talk about selling their company. For those who are listening who don't know what an earnout is basically a chunk of money that's held back by the acquiring company, because they're wanting you to deliver certain things. So you getting the rest of that valuation money is contingent on hitting certain performance metrics. And the higher the perceived operational risk on the buyer side, the higher that earnout is likely to be, right?
Agreed,
So
100%, a hundred
yeah,
percent. So,
yeah,
I mean, 100%. I have seen that. I have seen money being pushed to the earnout and then the earnout being tied to certain milestones. I have seen earnouts tied to integration. I see that
yeah,
more often than not. And so the harder your integration is, so the more rustic your company is, the most unprepared, the more and the steeper learning curve that you will have to earn that
yeah.
earn, which can be a big chunk of money. So,
Exactly. We're talking about millions of dollars.
yes.
Like this is highly motivating. And so you should be, if you're a founder thinking about selling your company in the next, I don't know, 2, 3, 5 years, like you should be focused on, the legal diligence and then making sure that you're running a tight ship from an operational perspective, because whatever investments you're going to make into that now, they will more than give you a very healthy ROI when your earnout is either minimal because there's high confidence, right, on the buyer side,
Right.
or when you're so well prepared to execute operationally that you're going to hit those milestones and get your earnout and then go, enjoy being a successful.
Exited founder. Just to close, if you had any items that I may have missed that you wanted um, to mention.
Thank you. A great conversation. I can talk about this all day. If anybody listening wants to talk about it some more, definitely get in touch with me. But I will bring it back to the people part. Yeah, I went to a presentation by a guy who used to be the head of science at NASA until recently. So he is literally a rocket scientist, literally.
Wow.
And he gave a talk about like success factors in at NASA. And he said, it's obviously a highly, highly technical environment, right? Like these are rocket scientists and they're like landing spaceships, and he was talking about landing helicopters on the moon and stuff like that. He said that when he went into his role at NASA, he thought that 80% of failures in these projects were technical and only 20 were caused by people factors. And he said that by the time he was exiting NASA and moving on to other things, that it flipped for him, that he understood that 80% of failures are people driven and
Right.
only 20% is technical. So when you think about the success factors and integration, it is often about people. It's people who are not prepared mentally, emotionally, people who enter integration already exhausted by the
Right.
process. and who just don't have the bandwidth anymore to take on this next big thing, which is sometimes the most challenging phase of their professional lives. And so the sooner you can start preparing for yourself and building a leadership team that will be capable to go through this process and building the operational tools and processes that will make that process softer, easier, less loaded, the more likely the people who go through this are going to be successful. And that's both on the seller side and the buyer. Like on the buyer side, I was a GM who had to work with founders who just they didn't want to talk to me anymore. They didn't want to do the things that we had to do together because they were exhausted and frustrated and just wanted to get out of there. And then I had to go in and step in as a replacement for that founder, leading this team through integration. And so like it was hard on me too. So it's really all about the people, which is probably no surprise to anybody who's listening to this.
Yeah. Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Elena, and everybody attending and everybody listening.
Thank you, Gabrielle. I love talking about this stuff. Let's
Thank
keep
you.
talking.
Same.
All
Will do.
right. Thanks, everyone. Bye.